Thank you very much for having me. I am very pleased to be a part of this conference. I think it is an incredibly important step that we try to figure out what next and how we can apply ourselves for these incredible transformational times we're living at. I am going to go over I know that many of you have heard a lot of stuff about Iceland and how it stood up against the banksters, and in many ways we did, but there is also a lot of hyped up information, which I am a real believer in factual information, because I don't think that we can make any changes if they're built on sand. So I'm going to go over the beginning of the collapse in Iceland. I'm going to go over the peaceful revolution we had and the demands the people had and how we managed to get them met. I'm going to go over the crisis and why crisis is good. I'm going to go over the creation of the political alliance that we did in the wake of the crisis, the political alliance of the grassroots. I'm going to go over why I decided to enter into this servitude and our first tasks in the parliament and sort of how we tackled it to be all of a sudden in the belly of the beast. I'm also going to go over some of the things we truly did correctly, and we did that by applying direct democracy and sort of hacking into the system, and it would have been a lot harder to do that if we did not have people on the inside. I'm going to go over, the thing that I was the most proud of during these 4 years inside, and that was the crowdsourcing of the new constitution and the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative. Then I'm going to talk about my newest creation, which is the Icelandic Pirate Party, which we just got 3 people elected into the system out of 63. And I will talk a little bit about why I feel the pirate parties of the world are so important as a part of this struggle that we are addressing here. So, in the beginning, there was this. I'm going to roll back to 2004 in Iceland. That was the time when the beginning of the privatization of the banks started and the preparations for that. All our banks were public, and we had a lot of community banks. We actually had a lot of public banks based on the same models that you were discussing, and they're quite common. But there was not the main big banks in Iceland had sort of transformed into the banks as we know them today, which are banks that make money out of nothing. So we had community banks that sort of were based on cooperative thinking from the old days. And it's important for you to know that Iceland only got its independence in 1944. We were a colony under Denmark for a long time, and that's why I often refer to us as high-tech aboriginals. So we're white, so nobody really, sees the underlying tribalism that is actually a very important soil for who we are, and that's why it is so easy also for the large American corporations and now currently the Chinese government to manipulate us and give us glass beads that our corrupt politicians accept. And the glass beads are a sports hall in the countryside instead of what used to be offered in the old days. So in 2004 and 2005, there was a huge struggle in Iceland, and I was a part of that struggle, and I got nicknamed an environmental terrorist as a result. So we were trying to stop a massively big dam being built in one of the last remaining pristine highlands in Europe. And the corporation that was building the aluminum smelter for Alcoa is called Bechtel, and I'm sure many of you... Exactly, I know. I did a very extensive research into all these corporations. They, of course, struck a deal with some corrupt politicians in Iceland to get the job. And I'm sure the politicians pocketed some money for it. And so what the government did in Iceland was to create this huge project during boom times, which is a disaster in itself. And at the same time, they were privatizing the banks. We had like 3 big banks. There used to be, one of them used to be actually a farmer-run community bank. And they somehow made that into one of the monsters. They had promised during the privatization process that it would be done professionally. We would get people that knew something about banking into it, which is always reassuring. Even if many of them are crooks, at least they don't cross over certain lines. But in the end, they just sold it to their political friends and supporters of them in the different political parties. And needless to say, of course, studying political parties from inside, they're all based on the same model as Church of Scientology. Just look at it. Look at the infrastructure of political parties and then Church of Scientology and tell me if there's any difference. And what we found out after the financial collapse, so this sort of happened around 2005 and 6, probably 2005, we found out that they never paid for anything. They never, they lent each other. So, oh, hey, do you want to lend me money to buy one of the big banks in Iceland? You, the other big bank? Yeah, sure. Okay, can you lend me money so I can buy the other bank? And so they never paid anything. It was all a lie. And nobody knew about this. So how many of you have seen Enron, the film Enron? Okay, good. So when I saw the Enron film, it was almost a replica of what happened in Iceland. So the people on the floor, the general public and the pensionists and so forth, they had no idea what was going on behind the shut doors in the what I call, they no longer smoke cigars, so I call it the perfume rooms. And the government knew about the looming crisis, just like when the crisis, we had a mini crisis in Iceland. And they didn't learn from that. And then we had some experts come in, like somebody that was going to be here, Michael Hudson. He was one of the people that warned about the situation in Iceland, and nobody wanted to listen. And actually, the politicians that were in charge at the time, whenever, I remember there was this Danish expert that said, this is absolutely unsustainable. You're going to get into so much trouble if there's going to be any volatile elements in the financial markets abroad. And the Minister of Culture and Science said, he needs to have a re-education. So this was the sort of what was going on in Iceland during the good times, when everybody had four-wheel drives and summer houses and so forth. And then it all turned around really quickly. And I never forget the day when it happened. We actually had a great American artist in Iceland that day, a good friend of mine, David Amram, who used to play Pull My Daisy with Jack Kerouac. He was playing that day in Iceland, and I went to the day when we got the news that one of the banks collapsed. I knew it was the beginning of something horrible, because I had told my friends prior to the financial crisis, when all of a sudden all of them were really rich because the mortgages went up, that soon the banks would own all of the properties in Iceland, and they didn't want to hear it. Nobody wanted to hear the stuff that those of us that questioned what was going on, and the media was just playing along because the media was, of course, owned by the same corporations that owned the banks. So the first day, I knew that that was the beginning of something awful. I don't think most people realized how bad it was going to get. So this was late 2008. Little did we know, though, when this happened, and then the government had actually known about this like half a year earlier, that there were all these signs that this was all going to collapse on us, because what happened after they were privatized is that they grew so rapidly. And so this can happen everywhere. They grew so rapidly that they became somewhere between 5 to 10% of our GDP. 5 to 10% of the GDP of a whole country. And it's, the numbers have been sort of rotating. First I heard it was 10%, then somebody said 5, somebody 7, so I say sort of 5% to be conservative. Now, next thing we knew was that they all of them collapsed. And there was this huge scrambling just to keep, like people, the Icelanders that were living abroad, that were studying and so forth, they couldn't access their money. They were just left to dry. And then the Icesave bank collapsed. How many of you have heard of Icesave? Okay, so I'm going to go deeper into Icesave since there are so few that have heard of it. So it all collapsed. The government was, I remember I actually went, I was an activist before I got into parliament, and I am still an activist. I went to the parliament sort of viewing chambers to see the government when they were making the emergency laws. And I looked down at them, and they all looked like they were a 5-year-old that had just pooped in their pants. It was just so unreassuring. And they were sort of, it was just so obvious that nobody knew really what they were doing, but we were really lucky because some of our Scandinavian friends had a better perspective, and they refused to lend us money to bail out the banks, because the government that was ruling then actually was scrambling to borrow money from other countries to bail out the banks because they were too big to fail, they told us. Well, apparently they weren't. Because we created an emergency shield around Iceland, where the money that other, like the stakeholders and other, like primarily the hedge funds and so forth, could not just pull up all our resources in one take. And the technicalities of it, I can't really explain it. You can find it online if you go to Wikipedia. And there are many experts that have gone into all the technical aspects of it, exactly how they managed to do it. There's been lots of criticism of it, of course, from people, and particularly in Britain and Holland, because there was a bank, an online bank, created from one of our main banks, that the mother bank was in Iceland. It's called Landsbanki, and then they had these online banking functions called Icesave. So it had really high interest, sort of too good to be true stuff. And lots of people put their money in it, and including, the pension funds of police and all sorts of organizations that are not-for-profit. And it was a huge disaster, actually, when it all collapsed, because they only got the minimum back. Now, however, when it collapsed, the British government was so afraid that it would be a run on other banks that they decided to put, and I still don't understand the logic behind it, to put a terrorist law on Iceland. Now, this had nothing to do with the Icelandic state. This was a privately owned bank. So they put a terrorist law on us to prevent a run on their banks. And that meant, actually, that at the time when it happened, all credit lines to Iceland shut down. And we are an island with 320,000 people. We don't even have a military. So it was interesting to put a terrorist act on us. And on the website, I actually have a screenshot of this. On the website of I think it was the Ministry of Finance, in the UK, we were listed as alongside with Al Qaeda, North Korea, Zimbabwe, you know, Cuba, and but it meant that we were actually in a state where, because we have to import medicine and food and so forth, we were looking at food shortages and medical shortages. And then, to top it all up, we were being hit by great demands to go into an IMF program. And many of you are familiar with what happened to Argentina and Jamaica and other countries that were completely devastated, and let alone most of the countries in Africa have been, their infrastructure has been completely destroyed by austerity measures. And we were the first European country to have to go into, sort of North European country to have to go into a program of this sort. Anyway, so the people of Iceland was, of course, very shocked, and we realized that everything we had laid our trust in had failed us. Like, it wasn't just the banksters, it was the academia. Who sponsors the academia? It's the corporations. It was the media. Who owns the media? Corporations. It was the politicians. Who owns the politicians? The corporations. I mean, the banks have sponsored all of these elements of our society, and it is very dangerous because it means there is no space for critical thinking, and there is no space for correct and truthful information about what is really going on. So I was a part of, because I'm a notorious protester, so I was contacted by the persons that had the first protest outside the central bank to help them with a megaphone. So I was involved with the protest from day one, and first we only had we had less Icelanders than foreign media covering the financial crisis. But the guy that organized the protest, who in the end claimed leadership on it, he was very persistent. So he had protests every Saturday at the same time. And more people started to come until, and we recognized that the government wasn't going to do anything. I mean, the first issue on the agenda when the parliament came together in January was, should we allow alcohol in shops or not? And that's when, it was great, I mean, that's when people got really furious, like, it was not the crisis, but some pet project of the Conservatives. And we had a peaceful revolution. It was, we still, you know, people were burning the Christmas tree from Oslo, and it was quite heated. So the politicians felt afraid. They recognized that, and this I really think is important in any sort of mature democracy, the people in power should be not necessarily afraid, but respectfully weary of, if they do something wrong, that people will rise up and stop it. We shouldn't be afraid of them. And I feel here in the United States that people are very much afraid of, because the government is so oppressive, and the systems. And I'm glad some of you clapped about that, because that means that you are not afraid. So we had a protest, lots of protests, a revolution, and we had 4 demands. One demand was, we want to get rid of the central bank manager. He was really one of the main players in making this possible, this collapse. We want to get rid of the government. I mean, come on, 5-year-olds. And we want to get rid of the head of the Financial Regulatory Authority, because he completely failed. There were no regulations being exactly like here and exactly like everywhere else. It's the same thing. It's just so much corruption, and that is why it's so important that we really find ways to sever the ties between the corporate and the state. I think it's one of the main challenges. And there are some great organizations that have been trying to shed a light, like the Sunshine Foundation, to figure out who writes what in the laws. But eventually it would be best if just the general public would crowdsource the lawmaking process and make additions to it instead of it's only the lobbyists that get to do it. You are the government, remember that, my friends. We had many, I'm just checking how much time I've done. Okay, so we had, all of a sudden, like, having been an activist for a long time, it was always the same people. Always the same people that come and show up, but all the different types of protests, like the Iraq protest, and the environmental protest, always the same people. And then, like, during this time, there were like all these people I'd never seen. And like people had never expected to sort of create a grassroots movement on what to do so we could prevent this from happening again. And since I was, like I said earlier, known for organizing protests, I had been organizing protests for Tibet outside the Chinese embassy for 9 months every week prior to the financial collapse. And it was the only protest sort of going on in Iceland, so I was sort of got the staff of being the protester. We had like a massive get-together of all the different groups on 1st of December 2008, where we asked all of them to rally as many people to come and protest with us. And we also got and it was the first time that the unions said anything. So all the unions actually said, encourage the employees to give their staff, to go sooner from their working day to attend this big protest. And as a result of that, I got involved in a think tank on what to do. And one of the demands I didn't mention, we had 4 demands, and I've talked about 3, and we got 3 of them met, but the 4th one was the single most important one. And that was, we need a new constitution. And the reason why we really needed a new constitution is that we got a constitution that we've had like for 70 years, that is sort of recycled as a gift from the Danish king when we got our independence. And it doesn't really fit to us. And even if it would fit us, it doesn't fit this generation. And somebody reminded me that Thomas Jefferson said that each generation should actually have the right to reframe the constitutional process. And I am a firm believer in that. I just think it is so critical because constitution it has a single function. And the function is we have a dialogue about what sort of society we want to be. We have a dialogue about how we want to be as a nation and what we want the Constitution to reflect. And that changes between generations. It is not the 10 Commandments. Seriously, it is not the 10 Commandments. And if we could write it up like that in a simple way that everybody can memorize and hold dear, what the politicians do and the lobbyists, that they add all this stuff to the Constitution so they're completely meaningless. I've seen many of the constitutional rights in Iceland being sort of dishonored because people simply don't know it. They don't know it, yet it is the foundation of our democracies. So I was a part of this think tank, and eventually we came to the conclusion that we would need to get all the different groups together to figure out what can we do together, what are the 3 most important things we need to do now. And every one of the groups, and there were like 20 of them, some only had 3 members, some had 20 and so forth, they all agreed, or all put on a piece of note that we needed to create a political movement that would be sort of a coalition of all these different groups to push forward the constitutional process, and that the people responsible for what happened would be held accountable. And so, the anarchist, I'm a pragmatic anarchist, I realized that, anarchism is really about responsibility as an individual in a society and recognizing that you're a part of, your community. That's really what it's about. It's not about what we have been led to believe, that it's a chaos. And being pragmatic, I mean, I understand many people don't want any responsibility, unfortunately. I know that most of you that are here, you want it, and that's great, because we're never going to change our societies unless we put our effort into co-creating. Nobody's going to make your dream come true unless you put an effort in making it come true yourself. It's as simple as it is. Anyway, so I became a part of this very interesting process of creating a political movement, and 8 weeks prior to elections, we formed it. And we had done all the bylaws before and sort of the framework on what would be the agenda. And we all agreed that it should be a hit-and-run movement. We only want to get in and get a checklist achieved, and then just get out before we would get corrupt. And it's sort of like, you know, you're going on a mission into an alien sort of jungle, and you don't know if you make it out alive or not. So, well, I didn't want to run, actually. I'm a single parent with a son that has Asperger, and I didn't really have any time or aspiration to be a politician. But I couldn't get women to run, so I see there are lots of women here today, and I'm really glad to see that, because in most places where we talk about economics, there are so few women. And so I'm really glad to see how many of you are here, and just please carry on coming, because this money is like not only a man's world. And I have noticed I've been in a lot of think tanks and groups with, or not think tanks, just, you know, little grassroots groups with people discussing alternative economy, and I'm usually the only woman. So I'll be happy to tell my fellow women in Iceland that it's different here. So 8 weeks prior, 3 weeks prior, I decided to run because I couldn't get other women to take leadership in their constituencies, and didn't want to help create a party that only had men running. We got 7.2% of the vote. We didn't have any money, we didn't have any experienced politicians. We're just ordinary people that felt that our voice needed to be represented in the parliament. And we wanted to create a bridge between the republic and the public. And many people forget when you say republic, it is actually the public that matters. And we wanted to create the tools for the general public to be able to participate. And one of the important tools that you can ask for is the tool to be able to call for national referendums on important issues. The tool to be able to put forward as people's bills in Congress or within the Senate or probably Congress, and in Iceland, of course, it would be the Parliament. And so what sort of happened was that, you know, all of a sudden I haven't really realized that I'm a member of Parliament yet. And I don't really want to realize it, because people attach a lot of wrong things to people that go into servitude, like because they think they go there to govern. But it's really about servitude. And actually, I would really like to see half of Congress and all of the senators to be randomly picked out of your phone book. No, seriously, you will get much more passionate, qualified people, and they just serve for maybe 4 years. You can't have them serve too short, because we don't want the bureaucrats to completely take over either. So we have to figure out ways to deal with the bureaucrats as well, because the people that are within the institutions for very long, they really know how to play the game. Has any of you have seen the British comedy Yes Minister? I encourage you to see it, then you will really understand how politics really work. Okay, so there was lots of stuff that happened in the first year that I was in the parliament. One of the most significant was, did I tell you 7% and no money? Does it register? Because if we could do it, you can. It's not impossible. Everything is scalable, right? Start on the smallest state. Get a senator that represents your values. It's not impossible. I really want you to think about it. It is not impossible. Everything is possible if somebody like me could get into parliament. So we had a fact-finding mission. We got a commission that the parliament appointed to go and find out what happened and what went wrong. What 1,000 pages report that was exceptionally disturbing. Unfortunately, it's not been translated to English. My party, we worked very hard to get it translated because there is much to learn from it for other people. But you can actually find some of that stuff on the website of the Icelandic Parliament. And I will put together a guide very soon, a small book about what sort of happened in Iceland and where to find more resources and information. Because as you know, the people that work in the financial sector and the corporate sector, they love to make things so complex that you can't find anything of any value until you completely strip it and realize that it's all like the magician in The Wizard of Oz, smoke and mirrors. So we ended up actually, when we got the report, one series of unfortunate events. 3 days later, do you remember the volcanic eruption in Iceland? Yeah, so guess what happened 3 days after we got the report? So guess what the discussion was about? I do think it must have been hard. No, I don't think so, really. But one thing we did, and this has been very loosely reported and next to no reports about this, was I was a part of a committee that went through this massive report, and we had meetings, I think 72 meetings, to discuss primarily if we should call together a court appointed by the parliament, and it had never been done in our sort of young democracy, to persecute ministers. And we actually, persecute. Prosecute is, prosecute, it fits there in that incident, yes, prosecute. When it's Brady Manning, it's the other word. So we were supposed to, we agreed to take 4 of them after a very, very intensive work with experts on if they had done something wrong that would be unconstitutional in the sort of the prelude to the financial collapse. And unfortunately, the Social Democrats did something really pathetic when we had to vote on it in the parliament. It's a really bad system. It's very uncomfortable for many people to, put on the green button if it's their friends. I mean, people become friends in there, even if I don't, but most people do. So they failed to, we only got 1 guy. And because it was just 1 guy, he got a lot of sympathetic reaction from the general public, because everybody felt that, poor him, he's the only one, blah, blah. But he was the prime minister, and it's equivalent to the president. So it was sort of an impeachment of the former president or the prime minister. It's the same functionality. He got off quite lightly, but he had to go through the process. And it was an incredibly humbling experience for him, even if he didn't see it that way. But I thought it was extremely important for politicians to know that they can't be held accountable. So how many of you were aware of this, that he was taken to court? Very few. And these are probably, the most informed people, in this part of California right now about these issues, because you've been looking very much at Iceland. it's nearly been in no news, and it was like the way it was reported, it was as if it was something to be shy about. But I think it was an incredibly important step for our democracy. And you know, if I do something wrong in the next 4 years, or if I have done something wrong the last 4 years, I want to be held accountable for it. You know, it's like I shouldn't have special laws for me, even if I'm in servitude. We should all be following exactly the same laws. The laws are made for everybody. Do we have a separate law for the banking sector? Yes. Yeah? Why? Is it acceptable? No. Exactly. So what are we going to do about it? It's not enough to fire them. The thing is, like, if we don't change the system, and like, even if we jail them, like we are jailing some of the banking people in Iceland, but, you know, since they have lots of friends in the legal departments, you know, or the law firms, they're getting off really easy. And I don't really want to pay for their lodging. You know, haven't they taken enough? I would rather have them go and clean our streets. I think that would be much better for them. They could give something back, you know. And I would actually, some of them did such serious crimes against the Icelandic people that I would just like to expel them. But I don't want to do that to other nations, maybe it'll be a little nasty. Maybe we can expel them to a little island somewhere. No, but seriously, it is, for me, you know, I'm not a vengeful person. And for me, I think it is so important that we recognize that we have created, and we all in some way participate in the co-creation of this really faulty system by accepting that it can't be changed. And many people feel completely powerless, and that it's just too overwhelming, it's too big, it's, the consequences are too terrible, and the indoctrination, like it's being indoctrinated, what's the word? Into people from the day they're born, you know, that they should always be afraid. And particularly if they don't fit in the box, then there's something very seriously wrong with them. Where is the Ritalin? Where are all the pills? You know. Anyway, so we did work on we did a beautiful process around our new constitution. We had, I'm nearly done with my time. I have so much more to tell you. The constitutional process was incredibly beautiful and made me so proud, because what we did was that we actually managed, like, my political movement and the government. All the parties actually promised a new constitution because the demands were so loud during the revolution. And we crowdsourced it in such a way that we had a national assembly where we randomly selected people from our national registry to be the people that would tell the constitutional parliament and the parliament what sort of society they want to be, what sort of social agreement we want to have. And within it were really beautiful elements, and it's actually, I helped with translating, like I helped facilitating the translation of it to English, and it's written in a human language. It's not a lawyer's sort of, so we can all understand it, and in it, like, we took it also, we then offered anybody could run to be a member of the Constitutional Parliament, and there were like so many people that wanted to be a part of it that it actually became problematic for the people voting, because they were, you know, how are you going to make yourself familiar with 500 people in one go? But in the end, the document that was taken to a national referendum on if they wanted this, if the nation wanted this, was so beautiful and had so many important elements in it. One was 2% of the nation could actually put forward a bill or a request for a report from the parliament. One was 10% of the nation could call for a national referendum. Another one was a third generation Freedom of Information Act, meaning that everybody was transparent by default. And if a document needed to be secret, it needed to be filed. And an explanation why. That access to the internet was a human right, constitutional right. but we're a bunch of chickens in the parliament. So the people that fought, the parties that fought for it, they gave up in the last meters. And so just a couple of months ago, I saw my new beautiful constitution being put into a coma. Coma. It's not that, it's in a coma. Now, we know that coma patients often wake up. So I will do everything in my personal power, and there are many people that will do everything they can to get the new constitution out of the coma. But just the fact that we had this process is so incredible. And just the fact that the nation pushed for 2 national referendums to stop socialization of private debt in relation to ISEF, because what the British and the Dutch did to us when they paid the minimum, and then they sent the Icelandic taxpayers the bill with a tremendous interest. So much interest that it would have taken all income tax for a whole year to pay just the interest, and that would have killed us. And so I'm very proud of my nation to have actually stood up and hacked into the system in such a way that we managed to stop it. Finally, since I want to tell you, now I'm going a little bit over my time, I want to tell you that because I created this hit and run movement, it needed to be dissolved. It was horizontal. We don't have any leaders. We didn't have any leaders. We rotated leadership, and I did the same thing with the Pirate Party in Iceland. We were the first pirates to get people into a National Assembly of the world. There are 63 countries with pirate parties, including the United States. And I encourage you to look into there is something called Pirate Party International, where you can see what they're up to. I know there are Google Hangouts here with the Pirate Party in California. There is a new movement of pirates in New York area, and I know there are some in Missouri, I think. But help facilitate this new change. Like, the pirate parties are really, their main aims are direct democracy. It is creating a new framework for our systems, meaning that we can have much more influence on our both local governing and the larger governing, and transparency in the banking sector, and to have some influence on the budgeting. You know, if you don't know how your tax-paying money is being spent, they can get away with anything, and you know that here. I mean, it's incredible. How much do they spend just in the military establishment? Wow. Well, it's just so beyond, it's so huge that you can't even begin to understand how big it is. And so can you, but it's not. Wow. Well, then because there is no immediate threat, you have to go like to the furthest corners in the world to protect you. It's sort of weird. Anyway, so we are also focusing on, you know, new models in the banking sector. There are many people from us that have been looking into exactly what you are looking into. We are looking into a set of laws that I helped put together, or was the chief sponsor for, called the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative, which is about making Iceland into a safe haven of freedom of information, expression and speech, with laws that are actually made for this century. And I encourage you to look at them, because they're about whistleblowers, they're about source protection, they're about preserving our historical data online, which is very important. They're about the fact that to ensure that you cannot attack the IP host if there is content that you host. It's sort of like when you print a book, the printing press is going to get attacked, and banned from printing if they don't burn all the books that they just printed. And there's lots of stuff that we need to make ourselves familiar with. But I'm very proud of having managed to get a unanimous vote on the Icelandic Multimedia Initiative. And it is actually being constructed into law. We have beautiful Freedom of Information Act because of it, and the best source protection laws in the world, and transparency around the media. And I think if I can do this from the smallest, tiniest party, anybody can. And I just want you to remember and think that you, every one of you here, is just like me. I'm just an ordinary person. There is nothing more special about me than any one of you. And you can all be this change. And reclaim "Be the Change" from Obama. He does not deserve to have stolen that important slogan. And finally, please make yourself familiar with the case of Bradley Manning. Please. And he actually helped us in Iceland to expose one of the big banks. Not him, but WikiLeaks. He helped us expose IceSafe, because apparently he read through the chat log, the cables, and apparently he noticed how the big colonist countries like Britain, Holland, and the United States were trying to influence and facilitate that the Icelandic nation would actually indeed take this debt on its shoulder. So there is a reason why I feel that Bradley Manning is a hero, because he had conscience and courage that I would really like to possess myself. Thank you very much.